Okay, my part is a bit more boring. Today, I want to talk a bit about basically arguments for executives to go for Camunda, and that's because we discuss that so often. And the idea is, even if that's probably not the arguments you need now in order to be convinced that Camunda is cool, but probably you need that within the company for other people, for other stakeholders to move forward. And that's why we want to present that here as kind of a teaser to get into. And it's not a repetition of the morning, I'm going into a couple of more details. So for example, for the company, haven't talked about that, but we're a Germany-based company, so we're headquartered in Berlin, that's where we started, but we already have offices in the US, so San Francisco and Denver. Frederick said that. We're currently discussing a new office in New York, so the customer base is also spread worldwide, but with still a big focus on Germany, but we're catching up, especially in North America, very, very quickly, and as you can see also in other countries. And we're growing quite fast. Currently, we're around 80 employees. But growing, we were in that Deloitte Fast 50 of German companies, 21, I think we were. So we're growing quite fast. We're doing that still without external funding. So I think that's very special for open source companies. So we don't have any venture capital within there. So we're growing sustainably. We're earning the money we invest, basically, and we're still able to grow very fast, and that's pretty cool. And we're really caring about the topic. I think that's also very different to probably some other companies. So we wrote that book. The book is almost sold 40,000 times worldwide. So it's available in German, Spanish, and English. We're also in Santa Barbara area. There's the BPM Next, where all the BPM vendors meet to show basically new innovation. And there we won the award 2 times in a row, and these kind of things. It's kind of a bit of a bragging thing, but on the other hand, it shows that we're really committed to the topic. I think that's very unique. So we're really deep dive into that. Also, what we do with CB is very unique and very innovative there. And from the customer perspective, so the number of enterprise customers, more than 200, I already said that. If you draw that line, the line looks a bit like these lines should look like. So that's pretty cool. And we're still growing, so that's getting something really big. Pretty proud of that. And if you look at the customer base, you can also look that up online, or you have in that small leaflet. It's all over all of the industry, so that's not very industry specific. And if you look at it online, we normally also have more information on these customers. So what we always recommend in a sales cycle is to check this page or ask your salesperson. What we normally can do is we can also make a contact to these kind of companies in order to make a phone call or whatever. So what are you doing with that? Are you happy with Camunda and these kind of things? And we have reference customers in basically all industries. So if you look at it, for example, 24-hour fitness in the US, that's pretty cool. They also have like a case study normally online you can read. We try to put in as much details as possible, what they disclose basically. So that is really valuable. It's not just a logo, and they do, for example, really a lot of stuff, 20 million workflow instances a day. So that's quite impressive. Or I mentioned Allianz claim settlement or application handling. They're doing a lot, especially in Europe. 1&1, also active here in the US, but also in Europe. They're doing a bit what Goldman Sachs also told about. They have this central platform based on Camunda, and they're rolling that out throughout the whole company. Zalando shipping more than 22 million of orders a quarter over the engine. They're living by that, so that's really the core process of that. So there are a lot of things what the people are doing. We talked about the value proposition in the morning. What we can see, and you saw that throughout the presentations currently, and that's actually amazing for workflow automation technology, what we provide, you can have really a lot of different use cases. So probably you have these human workflows, which a lot of people think about when you say workflow automation, but probably you have fully straight through automated processes, probably on a large scale, or you do microservice orchestration, or we just heard a bit about solving integration problems of distributed systems with workflow automation technology. In its core, it's a state machine, and there are so many problems we have out there which can be solved. So there are a lot of these use cases, and they're normally mixed. Like, for example, you can fully automate a process, but whenever there's a fraud detected, you might give that to a human. And obviously, then there are all these examples from the different industry, like claim processing or in the telecommunication, these network management or whatever. You can read that for yourself. You probably can imagine that for yourself. What we normally can do if you think about what you could do with Camunda, if you talk to us, we normally have ideas what other customers of your industry are doing with the product. So that probably is a good idea to discuss. We recently asked in a webinar the attendees, so that's not the whole customer base, but we're quite a lot of people. We ask, okay, why are you evaluating Camunda? And that's what we normally hear. So not the top reason, but pretty big, 22%, replace an existing BPMNS. And that's interesting, at least, let's say, because they already have it. They invested in that. They sometimes have really like huge things running on that, but they want to replace it. And the typical reasons, I mean, I talked about that in the morning. The typical reasons are they are not developer friendly. They're these following very often this zero code approach, which makes it really hard to use, which is they are alien within the company. It's hard to find people which are capable of doing that. So if I discussed that in the break, they said, somebody asked me, okay, there's this bank, they are using Pega all over the place. Why should they switch to Camunda? But this is one of the reasons. It's really hard to find consultants or developers who want to work with Pega or who are capable of that. Pega is its own universe. Then you're really tied to that. You cannot use like Java development best practices and these kind of things. A lot of tools don't support BPM and so on and so forth, and too expensive for sure. On the other hand, we also see open source tools being replaced because they are probably missing tools. So I think we're pretty good at that, or they are not like really performant or not stable or these kind of things. Okay, homegrown workflow technology. I talked about that in the morning, also very briefly. So I see that like really once a month. Don't do that. It's really hard. Very often you end up with an engine which is really, really behind the market, so you don't have visibility. Or I even see sometimes that people start doing like an own graphical modeler. That's awesome. It's an awesome piece of work, but should you really do that? I mean, probably you can do different things in your time, and you will always lag behind the market, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's what the most of the projects recognize after a couple of years. Oh, that's horrible in maintenance. Let's just don't continue that. And then it needs like a management who is capable of saying, okay, we invested in that, but now we throw it away and use something else. Hopefully you have that. Okay, and then the typical stuff like, okay, we want to add the workflow product to our own software. We have a lot of software vendors embedding Camunda. You want to automate manual work. That makes a lot of sense. And you see the rising interest, really. We want to support microservice architectures or orchestration within these architectures. So there's quite a lot of things going on. If we look at what we typically get as questions, I have more. I start with the two most common ones. So one is like, can you do low code? We want to get rid of the developers or whatever. And oh yeah, and this is open source. Is that reliable? Is that secure? Can I really run on open source? Is that this like whatever Linux toy over there? And something we see, and it starts to get really easy to argue. I had this algorithm thing in the morning, or digital transformation software is eating the world was a quote which really went around the world. So you see that everything is basically start to be software. One good example, and we had Goldman Sachs today, so I picked that example, is they started to embrace technology. And what you can see is that the number of engineering jobs they basically offer or where they search applicants for. And if you compare that to other companies, what you can see is that that's really a lot. And if you look over it for the last years, there was a point in time where they started to really search for a lot of engineers. And you can see that for a lot of companies now, that they start to understand that a bank is basically a software company with knowledge of money, or probably not even, no, they should have a bit of knowledge of money. But I mean, it's not a tangible thing. I mean, they have a safe down in the cellar with some real money in it, but I even doubt that. So normally it's bits and bytes. The same for insurance. Insurance is probably they have some knowledge of risk or whatever it is, but they don't do it. So it's a software company. And nowadays you can say that. These are proofs of that. 10 years ago, that was very different. When we entered the bank, and our belief was already 10 years ago, we believed that more or less. And when you entered the bank, and there we were like a small company, like all these young guys over there, and we said, okay, you're basically a software company. The people smiled at us. But nowadays, that changes a lot. And there's these also embracement of open source. We heard of JDMN from Goldman Sachs. They are proud to release open source stuff. They are proud to talk about using open source, and that's all over the place. This is just from TechCrunch. That's an interview. You can read that yourself, but there, CIOs at major global companies now rely on open source technologies. And some executives discuss their open source first attitude. So that's really getting a thing. So that's important to be part of that. I was happy about reading that press release recently. So you probably heard that Microsoft acquired GitHub. So your executive will probably ask, what's GitHub? But on the other hand, he should be aware that $7.5 billion is quite an amount of money. So that seems to be an important thing. Let's read the press release. And that's awesome. I couldn't have written that better. They said, today, every company is becoming a software company. Developers are the center of digital transformation. They drive business processes and functions across organizations, from customer service and HR to marketing and IT. And the choices these developers make will increasingly determine value creation and growth across every industry. And that's where we are. That's where currently the companies are. And that's why developer friendliness, it's not negotiable. You need to have that in order to be part of that. Otherwise, you can probably try to transform the company in a company where you say, oh, we want to do low code. The business is doing all the stuff. But I don't think you will be really successful. And this is one of the core beliefs we have. And either your company is picking up on that or not. And I think in the long run, that's an important decision, and that should be done wisely. But I'm probably talking too much. Yeah. So I think most of the companies out there should see themselves as a software company. That's really important thing. And then low code is not really an option. You have to invest instead in a really software engineering culture. You have to embrace it. You want to get the best software engineers. You don't do that by presenting them like a zero code tool, because then I normally call that death by properties panel. So whenever you have a tool where you look up like a recipe, you Google for a problem, you see the recipe in the web, and then you have to follow a YouTube tutorial, 3 minutes, how you click that together. I mean, you want to copy and paste code. 3 seconds, copy and paste code. That must be possible. And yes, yeah, there are a lot of other stuff which is for me not that important at the moment. Okay. Then another question. I was asked that in a break as well, so that fits very well. Currently, there's a hype about robotic process automation, RPA. Who has heard about RPA? Most of you. Who's using RPA actually? Okay, 2. Not that much. If you Google for RPA, that's pretty cool. So you can learn what is robot process automation. It seems to be robots typing something in the keyboard, or robots lying there and doing strange stuff. So that's robot process automation on Google. No, but what it's really is, if you look at a couple of tools out there, there are a couple of vendors. So for example, it's randomly picked. We have customers using different tools. It's more or less randomly picked. UiPath, it's an RPA tool. You already see where this is heading. So, okay, the general for your army of robots. But foolproof development tool. Okay, that seems to be without developers again. Developers are fools? No. UiPath provides the industry's most intuitive, feature-rich automation development environment, highly visual process designer, equips employees for fast and easy configuration of robotic worms. So simply drag and drop. Okay, that's somehow sold as low code, which is, Okay, but on the other hand, we have in a picture. Okay, log into Salesforce, search contact, get information, create CSV file, embed that, send an email, and so on. So it seems to steer a user interface, and that's what RPA is doing. It can, like a macro recorder. This is how this looks like. So you can basically steer user interfaces, which is kind of valuable. So whenever you have a legacy application which doesn't have an API, which unfortunately is true in a lot of companies, you have legacy and they don't have an API because they were made like 10 or 20 years ago when it was not normal to have an API. And then you can use RPA to steer that. You should be aware that this has a pretty high cost because as soon as something changes, like a release change, a operating system change, you probably have changes in UI you have to adopt. So it's pretty volatile what we hear from customers. But then it's a good tool because then you can automate or include tools in your automated processes which don't have an API. So that's the use case, and that's a sweet spot. Therefore, you should use RPA. But what you shouldn't do, and you saw it on the marketing, it's kind of presented as kind of zero code again or low code. And what we already saw customers starting to do, that the business department start to do defining flows, which are, this is the RPA flow, open CRM, select something, enter something, press enter, wait for something, click on button. This is how this looks like. And what you're tempted to do is now to automate your whole workflow like this, clicking through different tools, and that's a very bad idea because what you end up is like a spaghetti, like a mess. And whenever something changes in one UI, you have to adjust this, but there's an ERP application which didn't change, and so you get a lot of problems. So what we currently do at customers using RPA is basically extract that and say, okay, there's an overall workflow, there's a business process going on. It's a different granularity. Where we say, okay, we, for example, enter sales in CRM, and then we create the order in ERP. And probably for the CRM, we need an RPA flow on the low level. But then we call that RPA flow, and we have the overall workflow steered, for example, by Camunda. And that makes much more sense, actually, to have it. And then the granularity is right. And then RPA can deliver quite some value, actually. But you shouldn't be tempted to move it the layer up and use it as a low-code tool. That will not work again. It didn't work in the past with the low code. It will not work with the RPA. And then it looks a bit like this. So you have the workflow engine, probably or hopefully Camunda, then you're in a good place. And then it might be that one activity uses the RPA tool in order to talk to a legacy application which doesn't have an API. But if you have integrations with tools with API, you prefer the API. And then, by the way, this also allows to have evolving throughout the life cycle. So you could start with a process where you just have a human doing the stuff, and then you say, okay, I bought this RPA tool, so I replace that human with an RPA tool. And then later on, probably I get a new release of the legacy application. Now they have an API, then I replace that with a true API call, and this allows to evolve these kind of things. Okay, so RPA is kind of great to automate anything with the user interface, and that makes sense if you want to talk to a legacy application which doesn't have any API. Okay, but you shouldn't use it as a low-code tool or as like the central hub for integrating everything, or like also like this is my long-term solution to do these kind of things. And obviously, the most important thing, it's not about robots at all. So this is what RPA is about. Okay. Good. We talked about Camunda, the product. Now, I want to briefly talk about, okay, what's a good strategy to introduce it? And we did that at a lot of customers, so there are quite some patterns we could follow. And again, this doesn't have to be like a waterfall thing, but it's more waterfully than in the beginning, because what normally happens is that people start with an evaluation. So that It's roughly, very often, like 1 to 2 months. There you really do a proof of concept normally, and we really recommend doing proof of concepts, and we really recommend to let us be part of that, because normally we can also be a big help in discussing architecture, in avoiding the typical traps and these kind of things. So it's also much faster if you're part of the POC. So that's what we recommend to really do. Normally 3 to 5 days, but that sometimes it's even really fast. So from experience, the POC is very often quicker than you might think of. On the other hand, like involving legal or involving the procurement is normally much slower than you probably anticipate. So we also recommend that starting that at least as soon as possible. Yes, question. So what's the best way to engage with us? It depends a bit on the situation you are, but the best thing is to send us a mail or the contact form, then we can talk to you. Normally we set up a call, and then we discuss the situation, and then we see what's a good next step. Like probably we're jumping into a proof of concept, or probably we're jumping on a more detailed WebEx, like for 2 hours discussing technical stuff. That depends a bit on where you are exactly. But normally if you send out that contact request, we're jumping on a call. That's normally the first thing. Okay. Then you implement the first project. There you do basically what you do. And we already talked about that. And obviously a lot of the things are pretty clear normally. So it makes sense to do some training. We provide these kind of trainings. We are happy if you do your own BPMN trainings, but we can help you with that. It's just important that the right stakeholders are at least familiar with a certain level of BPMN. We're big fans of doing short increments, like whatever the process or development process is on your end, but it should be like short increment, tangible results, trying to learn as fast as possible. We're quite fans of Agile here. And we are having best practices. They're not available freely, so the enterprise customers, there are certain best practices only available for them. So that's also asked for them, because I think you can avoid a couple of pitfalls. And then very important, proof success. I mean, as soon as you start the first thing, and we recommend to do 1 project and really do that before you, not starting 10 at once, but probably do 1, learn, see how it works in your organization, and then talk about it. Normally people start approaching the projects, asking, oh, can you show me that? Oh, what was your impression of that? How did you do that? And communicate about that. Probably define clear KPIs. I also discussed that in the break earlier on. It's very often forgotten to define clear KPIs, what you try to achieve with the product, so you can monitor that. Or you can use Optimize in order to show, okay, this is the process, this is how we move through, and this is the cycle time. Okay, this is now much quicker than it was, and these kind of things. Right. And then go into the next project. Okay, this is how we typically approach that. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I tried to make it quick, actually, just to give you a couple of hints and hooks and here and there. You can still approach us, ask us. We're having a short break, I think. Where is master of the agenda? Yeah, we are having a coffee break. Oh, a longer coffee break, actually, till 3:30. Okay, so use that, ask us everything. If you know something triggered and you want to know something, ask us. And then we're still having the live coding CV part. I'm allowed to do that today, so I can code a bit, which is, I love that much more than doing the slides. So there we see something. And then we will have like a slot for all the discussions in the background. So you can already make up your mind what questions you have for later on. Okay? Thank you, guys.